Now we're good. All right. What's going on, my fellow wealth creators? Matty Ice here. I've got an awesome video for you today with my good friend and mentor, Chris Kirkpatrick, owner of Life 180. And
what's up, all?
Yeah, man, I appreciate you being here. And today we're talking about our favorite topic, IUL, Index Universal Life Insurance. So we just got done. We just got done with the Whole Life Mastermind, the Fast Start Forum in Fort Lauderdale, which was awesome. We're probably going to do a separate video on that. But Chris and I were having some interesting conversations about IUL, just like regarding lawsuits and all the crazy stuff that's happening. And figured, it's been a little while since we've done a video about IUL, and obviously you're a mover and shaker in the space when it comes to exposing the risks of IUL. So I wanted to get you on.
Kind of my thing.
Yeah, kind of put you on the map a little bit, right? So, and maybe we can talk about, a little bit about the David McKnight feud as well. So maybe
if you want,
we'll touch on that. So, but what I want to start with actually is to let people know you actually have a new book coming out very soon.
I do.
IUL Exposed.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean,
because I've read it and it's freaking awesome. I cannot wait for
Thanks.
people to get their hands on it. But tell us a little bit about it.
I wrote the book because I want to disrupt the industry, because there's the book is titled IUL Exposed, and then the subtitle is The Truth About the Most Misrepresented Product in Financial History. And so notice I didn't say the worst product. Notice I didn't say anything, whatever. It's just misrepresented. And so the entire purpose of the book is to talk about and discuss and show, enlighten people to here's why it's misrepresented. Here's where the mischaracterizations and representations of the product are. And here's how it actually can work. Here's where it does fit into a financial strategy. And ultimately, I just believe nobody should put their money into anything they don't understand, right? And so if you're going to utilize it, understand where the risks are, understand how it actually works, understand, just all the moving parts, because the biggest problem with IUL is it's a very complicated product sold as a very simplistic solution that can solve a lot of different financial challenges. And it's simply just not true.
Right.
That said, there are certain use cases where an IUL can make sense, and I think a lot of people have kind of pigeonholed me as the guy that hates IUL and thinks they're evil and whatever. And I don't think the IUL products are evil. I think, I don't believe it's just a product, right? Now, I could make an argument that a lot of the companies perpetuating the misinformation about the IUL products are evil, and just capitalizing on an opportunity to separate their clients from their money. And that's a whole different conversation. But ultimately, I think there's a lot to this. And, when people understand what the products are, how they work, where the risks are, I think what I find is they wind up in my side of the camp and my side of the street, basically saying, well, if that's actually how they work, I'm just going to go do a whole life insurance policy anyway. Now, there are certain things, and we can get into it if you want, where sometimes IUL will make more sense in whole life, depending on what you're after. But once again, it's just it's just a matter of trying to understand what problem you're trying to solve first, and then reverse engineering and finding an opportunity with the products that have the attributes that solve the problem that you're looking to solve, right? Rather than buying this product thinking it's going to do all these things for you.
Right. As you say, as opposed to this miracle unicorn financial product that's going to solve all these problems. It's really positioned as this one size fits all solution. It's so much better than the 401k. It's so much better than really any tax qualified plan. It's better than being in the market, and it's going to give you all this crazy retirement income. And it's just not true. It's all fantasy land, smoke and mirrors. Can it happen here and there? I guess, but we haven't seen it yet, and it's partly because it hasn't been around long enough to really prove that it can do that. Everything that's being used to sell it, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all just what looks good on paper. So we're making a lot of assumptions around this product. And I've started to shift my focus around IUL quite a bit as well, like how I come at it. Because initially I was pretty fired up about it. I was really pissed off because, like you said, you said it perfectly a minute ago, where you were saying, well, like you learn how IUL works and what it realistically might be able to do, which is maybe 0.5%, maybe 100%, as far as internal rate of return above a whole life. But then the question becomes, is the risk worth it for that extra little bit of reward? And for me, absolutely not. I want nothing to do with it.
Right.
Whole life was actually what I was looking for. Now, it might not always be the case, but you don't know that unless you understand how it works. And I've shifted my focus a lot to IUL from IUL sucks to it's the most misrepresented product in the world right now, right? Because like I said, can it work? I'm sure it can. Okay, but if and I've been going back and forth with some people on LinkedIn with this. It's like, it's not that we're anti-IUL, we're anti-misrepresentation of the product.
Of course.
That's really
we're anti-hype. We're anti-hype. Like, the problem with IUL is that it's a bunch of half-truths being used to sell it, right? And so we're not anti the product, but I'm anti-misinformation. I'm anti-ignorance and naivety. I'm anti the fact that we've got all these agents that are out there selling something that they don't fully understand. And what drives me crazy is, and wait, listen, I've got my book coming out, right? And I can't wait to see what all the people in my chat thread, and I can think of a couple people in my comments on my YouTube channel that are always commenting like, you don't understand this, you don't understand that. And I'm like, wow, based on your comment, it's pretty obvious that you actually don't understand. And so I can't wait for people to actually read this book that have been kind of trolls and challenging me to actually see the impact that it makes. I think it's going to open a lot of eyes. And the problem is, this is a top-down problem. It comes from the insurance companies. It comes from the fact that these insurance companies are educating agents with half-truths. They're telling the happy-go-lucky upside potential of the story without talking about the reality of the downside risk. And their positioning IUL is that it's got no downside risk because you can't lose to market risk and market loss. And so, like, the reality is nothing could be further from the truth. And, if you just read the illustrations, that's it. If you just read the illustrations, go out, get an illustration, make sure it's run with the potential income that you want to be able to pull from it. So all the disclaimers and disclosures about the risks of that income being taken are disclosed in the illustration. Because if you don't have the income illustrated, a lot of those disclosures, disclaimers are not going to be included in the illustration. That's one of the little secrets about being able to check and evaluate these things. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll show you an illustration on a Zoom call. And I'm not saying every IUL agent does this, but this is a prevalent tactic where they will show you that, and then they'll run you an illustration. And on the Zoom call, they'll show you all the income, and then the illustration that they'll share with you won't show you the income. It'll only show you the quote unquote growth and the cash value with the current assumptions. And because they didn't show that, they didn't send and share with you the illustration with the income assumptions, it's omitting on the illustration. They don't have to share a lot of the disclosures about the risks of said income being taken out. So,
and even when they do show income, and this was a major red flag for me with IUL illustrations, is it shows the market going up every year, and it also has that 50 basis points of positive arbitrage when you're taking the loans out. And here's the thing, again, it's all about full disclosure. If somebody understands that, number one, the market's not going to go up every year. Okay, that's number one. We have to manage expectations. But let's say we insert a 0 year there. Yeah. The question now becomes, are you okay with the amount of interest that you're going to have to pay on that participating loan? Assuming that that's what's being illustrated, because that's what's primarily illustrated. Now, if they're taking wash loans, then that's a whole different conversation. That, to me, is a more realistic way of utilizing it for potentially retirement income, even though I'm still not a fan of that. But
realistic, but that still comes with its risks, right?
Sure,
like, that's important to understand.
But what I'm getting at is, if people understand what the risks are with taking those loans, then, and you want to take the risk, fine. I don't care. Could it work better than a whole life policy, and that, like, for retirement income? Potentially. Okay. But what we always come back to is people are not being disclosed those risks that you could potentially have. If you're taking those participating loans, you could potentially have a $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 hit just from the interest in a 0 year, because the income shown on these illustrations is so aggressive. It does not take long to build up a massive loan balance. And if you have a 0 year with a 4 or 5% loan interest rate, where do you think that's coming from? Now, if you're okay with that, fine. but
Right.
people are not being told that kind of stuff. It's really frustrating.
Well, I think it's important to distinguish that in the fixed market, when I say fixed market, I mean whole life, index universal life, index annuities, any of the fixed products that life insurance agents are licensed to actually represent and sell, right? And educate their clients around. In that market, our job is to create a predictable result for our clients. That's really what it is. And to educate our clients simplistically on how these tools work. And when we look at that, I think it's just easy to say the reason I choose whole life over IUL is because I can create a predictable result. With IUL, there's nothing predictable about them. And that's the reality.
Right. And I was watching some IUL videos the other day, and the gentleman I was watching, very knowledgeable. But again, it was still like what he was talking about was still misleading, because he was talking about cap rates, but not mentioning that cap rates are often reduced. So all the assumptions are based on assuming that the cap rate is going to stay the same, which it rarely ever does. And as soon as it starts to drop, you might as well throw the original illustration out the window, because there's no way that when you have a 0 year, Tom Wall was talking about this, the cap could be the
100%.
trap, where now that it's like impossible for you to catch up because the cap rate has been lowered too much. Like it's just mathematically, you cannot catch up to the original illustration anymore.
100%. And that is the problem, right? And so this goes into that's why I said you should never put your money into anything you don't understand. The reality is IUL is going to have to be very actively managed and very actively understood and funded properly, and maybe even the funding changed and overfunded down the road to be able to reach a result even more than you expect to meet the gains. And then, of course, if we look at that, then the whole conversation about the internal rate of return and all that stuff goes out the window, because you're having to put more money in to get this result. And so the internal rate of return on your actual cash in and the cash on cash return, we're looking at it being completely different. And so, the cap rates, this is one of those things. It's like, all right, everybody always talks about the cap rates. Well, that's based on current assumptions. Right. And so I think it's important, if you're going to buy these things, to understand, all right, what are current assumptions? What are the guaranteed assumptions? Meaning how much can they change the cap rates? How much can they change the participation rates? How much can they change the spread charges? What other elements of the policy and levers in the policy can they change to the insurance company's benefit and not your own? Right. I think those are important.
I think real quick on that, Chris, I think another question to add on top of it is, how many times have they done it?
Oh, every year.
Right. So because every company is a little bit different. I've done a video on this, like showing renewal, like cap renewal rates or whatever. Yeah. And the majority of companies lower cap participation rates, some by varying degrees. But I think an important question to ask your IUL agent is, okay, I see that these things are not guaranteed, that they can lower them. What has been the history of the company lowering cap rates on current policyholders? I think that's a phenomenal question to ask.
I mean, I think it's a phenomenal question to ask, but I'd even delve deeper than that and say, why have they done that? Right. Like, so, and if we understand why they're doing it, now you, as the person who's either buying or selling a IUL, you can make an educated decision. I just think if you're buying an IUL, you need to understand not just what you're buying with current assumptions, but understanding what lead to why those current assumptions are what they are. And if you understand why those current assumptions are what they are, now you can understand with what's going to happen in the market environment, in the economy, in what's potentially going to put those variables that lead to these current assumptions at risk to actually make them reduce. And as an agent, if you're selling, you should absolutely feel obligated to educate your clients about how these things work. But the reality is, people aren't doing it.
Well, like you said earlier,
most
it's really a top-down issue with starting with the life insurance company. It's a good segue into the next part of this conversation that I wanted to get into, because you said something to me very interesting at the Fast Start Forum, where we were talking about these life insurance companies marketing or marking the high IUL cap rates or whatever as marketing expenses. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. But it seems to me like life insurance companies, like you've got these agents selling based on current assumptions, and people are not being told that these cap rates can and not just can, but very likely will be reduced in the future, and not going over like how much of a negative impact that's going to make. So people are stuck on the original assumption, but then a couple of years later, when the cap rates come down, how does that impact your policy performance? They're not discussing that. But do you think that it seems to me that the reason for that is the life insurance company already knows that they're going to lower these cap rates or par rates or whatever, because some of them are straight up marking them off as marketing expenses. We'll get to that. But it seems to me that they are not educating the agents to that point that, hey, these are current assumptions, but let's make it very clear. This is normally what we lower them to, and we need to illustrate accordingly. It doesn't seem like that's happening. What are your thoughts on that? And then segue into the marketing expense when these companies lower the rates.
Yeah, well, here's what I would say is that we have to like use common sense in this stuff, right? And we have to think about like, what is a life insurance company's job? It's to manage risk, right?
Right.
And so if we think about the function of how products work, whether we're talking whole life, IUL, or a fixed index annuity, we're looking at, it's always a function of risk, and there are no free lunches when it comes to life insurance, especially anything to do with cash value life insurance. They're going to price these products out accordingly. And so to think that in an IUL, you're going to get a better return and more control and less risk and all this stuff, all this upside potential and downside protection and whatever. And it's just a stupid mindset, quite frankly. To me, the hard part is like, I understand how a new person who's getting exposed to a concept can kind of get talked into it by a fast talking salesperson. Sure. And if that client or prospect isn't educated about personal finance and has a very low financial literacy IQ, well, then I could see how they get trapped into it because the hype sounds really good. And
also the agent being a family or friend, because we know a lot of these agents are with these, right? There's multi-level marketing companies. That's where the majority of these are being sold. So of course they trust them that they're telling the truth. Totally. So why would they need to go educate themselves, right? That's a whole other aspect of it.
So I think absolutely. And I think it's a function of taking a look and saying, all right, on the risk continuum and how this is all working, what are the levers, what are the mechanisms that these companies use to price these products out effectively, right? And not have the risk, above and beyond the acceptance rates, the tolerance levels, to remain profitable as a company. Because remember, these insurance companies have to be profitable. If they're not, well, then they're not going to be there when people need the life insurance most, right? That's the reality of the situation. And so they don't make a ton of profit, but they have to have the margin there to make some money. And that's the first thing to think about. Then when we look at this and we go, all right, when you really understand, this is probably a different video, but when you really understand the function of how when you buy an IUL and the money goes into the general fund, and instead of giving you a fixed return that the general fund account would provide, which is effectively what they do with a whole life dividend, they're basically taking that return that they would credit your account in the form of a dividend with a whole life policy, and they're speculating with options. They're going out and they're hedging the policy, and they're taking let's just call it a 5% crediting rate, and they're buying call options. And now the way they do it, I'm not going to get into super detail here, but you understand that, let's say they buy a cap rate of 10%. Okay. Just for simplicity's sake. Now the question goes into, well, how do they get you and why are they giving you that 10% cap rate? Where it gets really confusing is that you go to any of these companies, I don't care if it's Nationwide, Allianz, National Life Group, F&G, all of them. Okay. It doesn't matter. Pac Life, they all have index universal life products, and they all have correlated fixed index annuities, and they have the same indexing option for both products. Okay. So if you go to Nationwide, for instance, you can go participate in the same index option with an IUL as you would with the fixed index annuity with Nationwide. Now, when you go to the fixed index annuity, what's going to happen is you're going to notice that the cap rate is probably 30 to 40% lower on the fixed index annuity than it is on the IUL. Why is that the case? Well, the case is because with a fixed index annuity, it has to be able to meet its guarantees immediately. With an IUL, if you go look, there's anywhere between, depending on the company, And depending on the product, there's anywhere between a 10 and a 15-year surrender charge. And so what happens is they know that they don't have to give you access to that money right away. They don't have to meet their guarantees right away. You are kind of on the hook, and the life insurance company is in control. Not saying that part is necessarily a bad thing, depending on your time horizon, your needs, and use of the policy and cash value and so on and so forth. But what I am saying is that, let's say it's a 10% cap rate. I'm going to use nationwide because I did a video on this like 6 months ago, and I showed a 6-year-old policy that was sold in 2018 that was sold with an 11% cap rate. The cap rate now on that product is like 7.75. Okay. Now it was illustrated at like 7.1%. Now the cap rate's only 7.75. That policy has no chance in God
it's
at
dead
producing
in the water.
anything. It's dead in the water. Now, right now, if you go buy a nationwide policy, you'll notice that the cap rates on their new products that they're selling is 10.5%. Well, how is it that they're doing that? They've launched new products with 10.5% cap rates, but old blocks of business, if you bought a policy 6 years ago, we're talking 7.75%. How are they doing that? Well, the reason is, A, they don't have to market the reduction in cap rates on in-force policies, only on products that they're currently selling, right? That's the crazy part. So what happens is it's criminal. And so this is happening rampantly across the IUL industry, where companies sell products with higher cap rates than the correlated fixed index annuity, and they're able to do so because they have the surrender period that keeps your money locked up and keeps them in control. And if you decide you want to access it, or you decide you want to change your mind, you're going to have to take the financial hit to do so. So the financial institution in the life insurance company is protected, right? So that's first and foremost. Now, as a surrender period goes on, the cap rates in that block of business might go up, it might go down. It'll tell you on the illustration. It could go either way historically, and 100% of the time that I've seen old blocks of business, the cap rates go down. Why is that? Because it's a function of two things. We have to look at A, what is the cost of options? What does the options budget look like? We have to take those two things into consideration. The market environment has not been favorable in that accord. And then B, we have to actually go and say, what is the actual price of that cap rate? And in order to figure that out, you got to be a pretty smart person. I'll throw a shout out to Bobby Samuelson here, Life Product Review. You can go to his blog. It's $97 a month. I get nothing for saying this, only except for I believe you as an agent and as a client should absolutely make educated decisions. And he actually has on there with week by week by week, he has a whole dedicated section talking about what is the price of a 10% cap. And when you look at it compared to what the market is actually looking like, you realize like, holy crap, these companies are way overestimating what their cap rates are, and they're actually lower. And when you look at the fixed index annuity cap rates, you go, oh, this is what makes sense. And here's the reality. The companies know that this is going to be the case. And what they know is that if they have to write off and this is what you were saying before about the marketing expense, if they have to write off any loss for any reason because it goes wrong, and they have to reduce cap rates, or they have to pay out more because they got it wrong, they write that off as an expense, as a marketing expense on the balance sheet, right? Now, make no mistake about it. These IULs are the most profitable products on the books for these life insurance companies because they're getting the biggest premiums and they have all the control to shift things around. Because remember, all other products are absolutely fixed products, like whole life insurance, fixed costs, fixed prices, fixed premiums, fixed everything across the board for the contract life duration of the policy. Term life insurance, we can have a conversation like term life rarely pays out. It's definitely kind of like the ultimate catastrophic policy to have in place. There's some living benefits with certain companies, which can be great. But once again, it's a fixed product. The pricing of those products are fixed, guaranteed for whatever the term of the policy is. Only with IUL can all of the variables of the policy be shifted around on you on an annual basis and be changed against you to your detriment. And so this is one of those things. And the insurance company does all this. They have all this control, and they even have this extra backup where if they get it wrong, they just write off their error as a marketing expense because they know that that gap exists. And what I say is the reason they do that is because they use the high cap rates to buy business to make sales, because they know if they illustrated for you at the cap rate for the rates that they could actually afford to guarantee in this moment in time, you would never buy it.
It wouldn't look anywhere near as good as it does on paper.
Right. And so
what I wish otherwise.
Yeah, what I wish they would do, because they allow you to manipulate the some companies, not all companies, will allow you to like manipulate the current assumption. Like if it's running it right now with like a 6.4 current assumption on the illustration, they'd allow you to run it at like, let's say a 5.5, right? They allow you to manipulate that number.
It's rare, but I've seen it.
Yeah, not every company allows you to do it. A couple companies do, and let's just say, and I'm saying this because I don't want people to come back and be like, oh, I can change that number, and like, okay, most companies you can't, some you can, but even the ones that you can, it's not representative. What I wish they would do is allow you to shift the cap rate and run illustrations based on reducing cap rates and say, all right, if the cap rate right now is 10.5. How would this policy produce and perform if the cap rate was 7.5 or 7.75, you know, kind of where we know that it's priced out. And if in that situation, you could go to the fixed index annuity, which is a more accurate depiction of what the cap rates are purely priced at. And then you can say, all right, I'm going to run it at that rate just for an apples to apples basis. So it kind of gives me a projection of what my cap rate will be in the long run. And I'm going to run it at that rate, and then
and how about
I'll see how it'll perform.
How about being able to run it at the current rate for other policyholders? But the fact that they don't have to disclose that is just criminal to me. I would imagine that the next round of regulation is going to, I would think, would address that because it's so deceptive. It's incredible. And I showed this in another video, but I'm just going to bring it up now because it's relevant to what we're talking about. Nice. The concept of renewal rate integrity, right? I've done a couple videos on this, but guys, I mean, look at this. And here's the thing too, Chris, is like, even like when people say, oh, I can, when you were talking about if they could lower the illustrated rate from 6.4 to maybe 5.5, it's still it is more conservative, but it's still a massive assumption. You're still assuming so many things because you don't actually know what the life insurance company is, like how much they're going to lower cap rates or participation rates or increase spread charges. Like you don't know any of that because it's all at the discretion of the life insurance company, not you. And that's why I also like when I see this, okay, when I see these outrageous numbers here about how far down the cap rates have come. Yeah. It's like, and then I have agents tell me that it's all about the design, right? It's poorly designed. Well, I don't care if you design the best IUL in the world. As soon as this happens,
you're done.
It goes right out the window, dude. It doesn't matter how it's designed. Look at this. And see, this is why it's so hard to predict because every company is so different. And I think that's why asking the agent the question, like, what has been the company's history of lowering cap rates? Like, what is the cap rate for a policyholder that has owned a policy for 5 years? I think that's an important question to ask because it's impossible to predict. Like, look at this. Lincoln, this is the product, Life Elements, all right? Started and was launched in 2007, initial cap rate of 11%. Look at what it's at 2024, 5.25%. But what are they marketing as? Look at the new issue. They're marketing it at 11.5%.
And this is what happens. This is all across the board.
Oh my God.
Like, and once again, not every company does it exactly. Some companies do it more intensely and worse than others, more extremely. Some companies do it marginally. But at the end of the day, what matters the most is the principles, right? Like the principles of like, how are they actually getting these cap rates? How are they setting the cap rates? Why are they what they are? What are the costs that go into? Because remember, they're buying those rates, right? Because if you understand the money comes in, they have an options budget. They got to figure out the options costs. And then based on the risk tolerance and what they can buy for those options, if you don't understand options, you should never buy an IUL. That's the reality. Because if you don't understand options, you're never going to understand the options cost and how they actually set the cap rates. And if you don't understand that, how could you ever put your money into something you don't understand? That's what I want to know. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. All the agents that want to defend IUL and that don't even understand those concepts and they just want to blow past it like it's no big deal. And ultimately it's the foundational principle that leads to why the fundamental flaw in IUL is what it is. And if you understand how the options budget is set through the general fund performance, how they participate in options by buying options, and you got to figure out what is the cost of options depending on the economy, and based on how they price out the options and buy a cap rate, because and if they do a no cap, like what are the costs of doing that? And there are absolutely costs, right? And so how do they make all this happen? And so when you understand that, then you understand, well, at the end of the day, and I love it, Tom Wall said this in his presentation, at the end of the day, the best you could really expect if you follow these principles, if everything worked out in a normal long-term economic environment, the best IUL would be what whole life is going to do for you, right? That's the best case scenario. Now, that's in a normal economy. Now, there are going to be moments in time, windows in time, and we've just had it in the greatest bull run of all time, that IUL is going to have its heyday where it's going to outperform because we had this great bull run, and that's phenomenal. It's great. But I don't know about you. I don't see that happening again.
Right.
And anytime soon. If anything, it's going to be the other direction. So in which case, IUL is going to be at risk, and it's going to underperform. And I would, once again, I think for the next 10 to 15 years, whole life insurance on a net basis after everything is actually going to outperform IUL.
I agree. Yeah, the where I see it going, and I mean, my dividend rate has already been increased twice since I started my policy. I think it's just going to keep going up from there. And yeah, we're going to see a lot of issues with IUL. I want to transition really quick into uncapped indexes. I want to touch on lawsuits, and also just to confirm, you still have your IUL challenge going, right? Nobody has still won that. I just want everybody to know that if you're an agent listening to this, then that challenge is still available.
It's there. Apparently, life insurance agents that have the ability to like run their mouth and talk a big game about IUL being so good, they don't actually like money, because I'm offering $10,000 to somebody that can show me if IUL has upside potential and downside protection and is run conservatively during the greatest bull run of all time. All I'm asking for is for an IUL illustration that's 10 years old or more, is out of surrender period, and I want to see the original illustration and an in-force illustration. All the in-force illustration has to do is meet the quote-unquote conservative illustration that it was sold with. And if you can do that during the greatest bull run of all time, then I will pay you $10,000. Nobody has been able to do it. And apparently nobody likes money. Like, the bottom line is, if IULs participate in upside potential during the greatest bull run of all time, they weren't able to really capitalize on the upside potential, what are we even having this conversation about, right? And that's the point. And once again, that's during the greatest bull run of all time. So what are they going to look like in a non-bull run environment? You know, that's my concern.
Seems pretty simple, pretty generous. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to get 10 grand. If these things are so freaking amazing, should be pretty easy to pull off, but that's just me. Let's talk about, I want to touch on uncapped indexes just for a minute, really quick, because we're talking about companies lowering cap rates. They're writing it off as a marketing expense and all that. And of course, one of the things that I get pushback on from IUL agents is, well, you just do an uncapped S&P 500 index. And again, they make it sound like that's just the solution to all the problems. Let me know if I'm on the right track with this. So it's almost just like a cap rate. Obviously, it's uncapped, but I'm talking about like in the beginning, right? So you have this uncapped S&P 500 index that has 100% participation rate. Well, the first question that comes to mind is that 100% participation rate guaranteed for the life of the contract? Which it probably isn't.
Well, you'd have to look at each contract individually, each illustration, and see what the guarantee participation rates are. Typically, it's not. So there's two things in uncapped illustrations that come into play. Three things ultimately. One is the participation rates. And first of all, if I'm going to do any uncapped indexes, and and this is just a warning for anybody, never do an uncapped index that is a proprietary index, because it's just smoke and mirrors, and they've done these like completely like insane.
I want to touch on that after this with the lawsuits going on. But for sure.
So
avoid the proprietary volatility controlled index at all costs.
100%. Just do the S&P 500 first of all, so it's an actual back tested on an actual index, and it's got the history and it's stable and it's got the, the results. And you know that the options market and pricing is going to be predictable, right? I mean, there's a history and a trend that you could follow to be actually understand what you're doing if you want to go and learn about the options. So there's that. Secondly, you got to take into account, and I'll say to that is that based on all those factors, that will maneuver the participation rate. That's one thing to consider.
Right.
Secondly, on no capped indexes, there's a thing called a spread charge. So even with 100% participation rate, then you have to check and see what is the spread charge. Is there a spread charge? And a lot of times, what you'll see is they'll offer a higher participation rate, but then they'll have a higher spread charge. Maybe the spread charge is 5, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 7. But the spread charge basically says is whatever you see for a spread charge, it means the first whatever percent. So for instance, if the spread charge is 5, it means the first 5% that the index does, you're not going to participate in. They keep it. That is the cost of buying that option, right? They're saying up to that price, you're going to get nothing. And if it goes higher, you keep everything above that. Now, a lot of times, and this nationwide policy I was mentioning earlier had a spread charge of 5% when it was sold, and a cap, meaning a guarantee of 15% on that spread charge. And so that seems way higher, meaning if they changed it to 15%, that means the first 15% return in the S&P 500, you would not be able to participate in. If the market did 25% return, you'd actually get a 10% return, which is just atrocious, right? Like if you think about it that, no chance.
So it started at 5. What was it when you ran the in-force illustration?
11.
Oh my God, dude.
6 years later, it was 11%. So that means that person who was participating in this uncapped index, they thought they were doing amazing. They had to pay. They don't participate in any of the market gains up to 11%. They only start participating above 11%.
Which goes real quick. I want to touch on that real quick, Chris. Which because you mentioned earlier that in some years, particularly when we're in an unprecedented bull market, IUL can have some really, really good years. So if the argument could be like if the market went up 26%, I think it did last year or the year before, or something like that, and even with an 11% spread charge, I still earned, what is that, 15%, whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be the argument. But how many times is the market going to do that as well? Like, so now what you're doing is you're promoting IUL based on the market going up 26%. Yeah, which that is not going to happen on a long-term basis. So yeah, you can have some good years, but if those spread charges rise and they stay high, and then the market does 15%, you've got 4 in that particular case, right?
For sure,
that's insane.
100%. And the other element to think about here, so that the first was participation rates, the second was spread charges. The next one is what we call the no risk rate, which is essentially the 10-year bond rate, right? Like if you look at it, Bobby Samuelson talks about this a lot. Right now, it's about 5.5%. So no matter what, on any policy, the no risk rate is the rate that the insurance company uses to protect themselves on these uncapped indexes. And so no matter what, that 5.5%, even on when you do something that doesn't have a spread charge, that no risk rate is involved all the time. It's always there.
Is that with every policy, or is every company different?
Every policy, if you got 100% participation rate, that 5.5% in this situation, whatever the 10-year bond rate typically is, that's kind of the metric that they use to measure it. That no risk rate is always there, even on with no spread charge. If they just are doing the participation rate policies, that no risk rate is there.
Is that specifically for uncapped indexes?
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Because they gotta remember, there's no free lunches, and we got to figure out how are they pricing this stuff in, and these cap rates, they could buy higher cap rates, right? If they wanted to give you a better return, but the question is, where's the happy medium on the cost of that cap rate? And based on what the general fund performance is and what their budget is, they got to dictate, can they afford to buy that? That's how the cap rates go up and down effectively. And then it goes back to the marketing expense conversation that we had. They know they can't buy 11% cap rates right now, but they're marketing a lot of times at 11%, even though they know that they could really only afford a 7%. And so what they say is that 4% difference they're just going to write off. Or maybe if it's an 8% that they can buy that they know, they're going to write off a 3% difference when they have those losses. And that's how they make it acceptable in their minds to do it, because it's a wildly profitable product that they control and that they have very little risk on. That's another reason, not to go on a side tangent, but that's one of the reasons that the underwriting for IUL is much more flexible and easy than whole life insurance, because of the fact that they know they can control their risk. If you think about the fact that all life insurance comes and it's underwritten, and the insurance company has to assign the risk of your life and lifestyle and healthy habits and, you know, all the things that go into human life value and risk. And with IUL, if they know that they can control all the variables on the back end, and whole life, they know that once you sign on the dotted line, they're contractually obligated to meet their obligations and your guarantees. Well, then of course it's going to be easier to be underwritten for an IUL than a whole life policy. The worst thing that happens in this business is agents work with clients because their underwriting is easier. They're trying to just make it as easy to get through and make the commission. I want to make it so I want the underwriting to be hard, because I want to work with a company that's actually committed to the stability and solvency and doing good business, you know, so they can actually be there for the participating members of the company, which are the policy holders. So,
and like, not just taking advantage of the fact that they have all these different levers that they can pull, right?
Exactly.
Where they're actually committed to the policyholder long term. And not to mention that if you are healthy, then and for the most part, I mean, you don't have to be super healthy, but if you could get a good rating, you want to go through underwriting, because if you don't, now you're subsidizing all the people that
100%.
are not healthy that are getting approved, because it's so much
100%.
easier, because they can pull all the levers. So you actually end up paying more for the same type of policy that you could have gotten elsewhere. Like, it's asimine.
100%. So
that's a whole other rant that I did a video.
Sorry, I had to go on that little tangent for a minute.
No, you're good. There's so many things. There's so many problems with so many things involved with IUL. It's like so far from being a simple product the way that it's sold. Like there's so many things you have to consider. That's why there's so many rants about it, you know?
But the good news is that I've got a book coming out that'll solve all those questions for you. And
it was really good. I can't wait. Once that is launched, we'll have links down below, guys. Make sure you get that. Can people pre-order it right now?
I'm working on getting that page up. So when do you think this video is going to come out?
Probably today or tomorrow.
Oh, geez, you've turned this stuff around, buddy.
Yeah, man. I'm launching it.
Give it a week.
Yeah, whenever it's ready, just send it to me, and I'll come back and edit the description. But yeah, I want everybody.
So
to get
I'll tell you what. If you're watching this video now and you're seeing us talk about this and the link isn't there, I'll say come back in a week and it'll be there. So come and check it out.
Get on my newsletter, get my free masterclasses and stuff like that, and I'll send it out.
Perfect.
Love it. What I want to finish up with really quick, Chris, is I did want to touch on the IUL lawsuits, just because it's been like a really wild year for IUL, and you alluded to some of this earlier about the volatility controlled indexes, proprietary indexes, and I'm sure you're probably not able to talk about it much, but you've been a consultant, I think, or something. Like, can you?
Yeah, we're doing some stuff.
Yeah, okay. That's probably the extent that you can talk about it, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. Here's what I could say. I can't get into any specific cases. I can't get into any companies. I can't get into any, details about policies and so forth, because I'm not allowed to comment on ongoing situations.
Yeah.
What I can say from a high level perspective is that due to the nature of my channel and the work that I do in helping people evaluate their policies, and I have a thing called rescuemyiul.com, where people go and they submit enforced illustrations with original illustrations. We do policy evaluations, and we see these things. I get between 3 and 5 submissions a day on that website.
Wow.
And which is crazy. If that doesn't tell you like what's going on in this space and where people are after they buy these IULs, then, I don't know what to tell you, but here's the deal. I get this stuff. And so it got to the point where I was like, oh my gosh, like some of these people are so screwed, quite frankly, because they put so much good money after bad. And they're like wondering, what can I do? Because it's been misrepresented and mischaracterized about what this product's going to do for me. And they've been putting their financial future on the line, pouring it into these products. I've got some people that are putting multiple 6 figures into these IULs for 4 or 5 years each. Like we got a guy that came through is putting $300,000 a year into an IUL for 5 years. And now 5 years later, he literally has a surrender charge, and the growth has been lower than it was illustrated at. And I mean, he's lost $800,000 out of his 1.5 million that he's put in.
That's wild.
And it's insane. It's insane. And so, and when you look at his original illustration comparatively, he was supposed to have almost the 1.5 million in there right now, you know,
Right.
including the surrender charges and all that taken into consideration. So it's a wild, wild world in this space. And so I just got to the point where I was like, man, I need to do something about this. If I can't help them, there's got to be a legal ramification, some legal recourse for these people. And so I partnered up with a litigation attorney. And now when people reach out to me, I literally just funnel them over there. The dynamic of my relationship with him is, you know, I'm doing evaluations, and, you know, I help analyze and consult and help break down policies as a product expert, so to speak. And it's been a really fun relationship because I know it's making a difference. It's actually helping people unwind these things that are potentially going to blow their entire financial life up. So.
Right. I would imagine that is very, very rewarding because it's really sad when somebody comes to you, wants help, needs help. Their situation, their finances has just been crushed by this thing. And there's really nothing you can do for them other than some type of potential legal ramification, which not everybody probably qualifies for that either. And so when you're able to help somebody on that, it's probably very rewarding.
Yeah, I mean that's it, right? Is just figuring out what's the best path forward, and it's not the same for everybody, and you know it's but that's just it. It's just a matter of taking a look at it, kind of lifting the hood, you know, of the car, so to speak, taking a look at it, seeing where the problems are, seeing what can be fixed, and sometimes it's an engine rebuild, and sometimes it's a tranny, and sometimes you just got to fix a hose, you know. So it's we never really know. Every situation is wildly different. Depends on how new, how old, how it was designed, what company it's with. You know, we're seeing a lot of patterns with certain companies that are leading to some bigger challenges and bigger problems for big groups of people, and of course those are leading to more litigation, so to speak. And so you know, but all that's going to come to the forefront soon enough.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's absolutely starting. Like I'm starting to see a snowball effect of like these massive class action lawsuits coming out. I'm seeing a like a repeat pattern, like a repeated offense of these companies and these agencies selling these things. And it almost feels like I'm reading the same exact lawsuit that I did last week. You know, it's a lot of them are involved or revolve around those proprietary or volatility controlled indexes and just how unbelievably misrepresented they are. It's like just massive misleading marketing practices. And the reason I want to bring that up, guys, is not necessarily like the lawsuit aspect is not necessarily to say to not work with a company just because they have a lawsuit, but if you're potentially because people get sued for stuff all the time, and sometimes it's just stupid, but sometimes there's a very good reason that these people are in lawsuits because they deserve it. And if you are about to make a major financial decision in your life, you would, I mean, I would want to know if the company I'm about to do business with is in a major class action lawsuit for intentionally misleading, or I'm not going to say intentionally, but misleading consumers on this product. And when you look at the lawsuit, I mean, it's like just so blatantly obvious. But that's an important thing to understand. If they're in a lawsuit for that particular reason, you should know that.
When you sell on half truths, as we spoke before, like it effectively gets interpreted legally as a lie sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Because there's an element, it's called good faith, the good faith marketing, right? And so you're not acting in good faith when you sell on a half truth. And that's something that comes into play. And this is what we're seeing a lot. On top of that, you're seeing anytime these IUL agents are selling IUL as the tax-free income retirement vehicle or the rich man's Roth or an alternative to a 401k, they're not licensed to be making those statements. And in doing so, they're opening themselves up to legal problems. And if you're a person with a policy that is purchased from somebody on that sales concept, well, then you have a case. Like that's the reality.
Right.
So,
So anybody watching this, if you have an IUL and you're listening to this and you're concerned, which I certainly would be, make sure you go to rescue my IUL, right?
yeah,
RescueMyIUL.com.
rescuemyiul.com.
We'll link that down below. All right. It doesn't hurt to at least get an evaluation of it.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And see where you're at, run an in-force illustration, because that's going to tell you a lot about the future performance of the policy too. So make sure you take advantage of that. Chris, we'll go ahead and wrap up with that. I want to be respectful of your time. Really appreciate it. You know, if we don't cap the time on this, we could talk about this for hours. So,
we could literally go all day. Maybe we should sometime just go live and just wrap on it.
Just see how long we can go. So as always, I appreciate it, guys. Make sure you subscribe too, because Chris and I are going to be coming out with some really good stuff this year. We were talking at the Fast Start Forum about our pillars to success and how we combine different types of wealth building strategies and just the different stages of building wealth. You know, how life insurance, whole life insurance is incorporated into that. It's going to be awesome. So make sure you guys subscribe. But as always, Chris, I appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure, my friend, and I look forward to the next one.
Ditto. See you, buddy.
All right, man.